If you had asked me 10 years ago what loyalty looked like, I would have pointed at my wedding ring. It wasn't flashy. Just a thin band of white gold Daniel picked out when we were 27 and broke but wildly in love. He slipped it onto my finger in a small church in Ohio, promising me forever in a voice that trembled with excitement. Back then, Daniel looked at me like I was the only woman in the world. I built my entire life around that look. For 15 years I was a good wife. I don't say that to praise myself. I say it because I believed in the vows. I believed in standing beside your partner when things were hard. I believe that love was built, not found. When Daniel decided to open his own marketing firm, I was the one who stayed up late helping him design his first website. I used my savings, money I had carefully set aside from my nursing job, to help him rent his first office space. When the business struggled during the first 2 years, I picked up extra shifts at the hospital. When he doubted himself, I reminded him who he was. When he succeeded, I stood in the background and clapped the loudest. And when he finally made it, when his firm started landing corporate clients and he began wearing tailored suits instead of clearance rack blazers, I felt proud, not suspicious. Looking back now, that was my first mistake. Success changed Daniel. It didn't happen overnight. It was subtle. Like a slow leak you don't notice until the ceiling collapses. He started coming home later. At first, it was client dinners, then networking events, then industry conferences. His phone began living face down on every surface. He started going to the gym twice a day. He bought cologne that smelled unfamiliar, sharp, expensive, foreign. And one evening, as I was folding laundry in our bedroom, he stood in front of the mirror adjusting his tie and said casually, "You know, you could try dressing up more. You used to put more effort into how you looked." I laughed at first, thinking he was teasing. He wasn't. I glanced down at myself, leggings, an oversized sweater, my hair in a messy bun after a 12-hour hospital shift. "I've been at work all day," I said gently. "I'm tired," he shrugged. "Just saying." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, a strange heaviness pressing against my chest. It was the first time in 15 years that I felt evaluated, compared, measured, and somehow found lacking. The woman who used to be his world was suddenly an afterthought. I told myself I was overthinking. That marriages go through phases. That stress makes people distant. I doubled down. I started cooking his favorite meals again. I bought new dresses. I even joined his gym. He barely noticed. The first time I saw her, it was by accident. I had decided to surprise him at work with lunch, something I used to do when we were newly married. I wore a soft blue dress he once told me made my eyes look brighter. When I walked into his office building, the receptionist smiled politely and told me he was in a meeting. But as I turned toward the conference room, I heard laughter. Not business laughter. Playful laughter. And there she was, standing too close. Her hand lightly touching his arm. Her hair long, glossy, cascading over a fitted white blouse. She couldn't have been older than 24. Daniel looked different, relaxed, animated, alive in a way I hadn't seen in years. The way he looked at her, I recognized it instantly. It was the same look he used to give me. My stomach dropped. He saw me before I could step away. His smile froze. The room went silent. "Emily," he said too quickly. "What are you doing here?" I held up the lunch bag like an idiot. "I thought I'd surprise you." The girl turned to me with a polite, slightly amused smile. "And you are?" she asked. Before I could answer, Daniel said, "This is my wife. Wife. Not Emily. Not the love of my life. Just wife." The girl extended her hand. "Hi, I'm Vanessa. I handle social media strategy." Of course she did. I shook her hand. Her skin was soft, her grip confident. I felt old. Invisible. Irrelevant. The meeting resumed awkwardly, and I left, pretending I wasn't fighting back tears. That night, Daniel didn't mention it. Neither did I, but something had shifted permanently. 2 weeks later, he sat me down at our dining table. The same table where we had celebrated promotions, birthdays, anniversaries. He didn't look nervous. He looked inconvenienced. I think we've grown apart, he said. The sentence landed like a gunshot. What does that mean? I whispered. It means, he sighed, rubbing his temples. I'm not happy anymore. Not happy. As if happiness were a new car you trade in when the shine fades. Is this about someone else? I asked. He didn't deny it. He didn't even hesitate. I met someone, he said flatly. She makes me feel alive again. Alive. So I was what? A graveyard? 15 years collapsed into silence. I supported you, I said, my voice shaking. I helped you build everything you have. I know, he replied, almost bored. And I appreciate that. But people change. People change. That was the justification, not betrayal, not dishonesty. Just change. He moved out within a week. Vanessa didn't wait long. 3 months later, they were openly posting vacation photos in CABO, her arms wrapped around him. His hand resting possessively on her waist. The comments were brutal. Upgrade. She looks so much better. Midlife glow-up. Friends we'd known for years suddenly went silent. I became the cautionary tale. The replaced wife. The woman who wasn't a nymph. When the divorce papers arrived, I signed them without a fight. That was my second mistake. Daniel was generous, at least on the surface. He offered a fair settlement. The house would be sold, assets divided evenly. His business was valued highly by then. He walked away confident, victorious. And when we met for the final mediation session, he had the audacity to smile at me. You'll be fine, Emily, he said. You're strong, strong. As if strength was something you choose when your heart is ripped out. But here's the thing about betrayal. It either destroys you or it wakes you up. And as I sat alone in my nearly empty house that night, staring at the walls we had painted together, something inside me shifted. For years I had lived in his shadow. I had defined myself as someone's wife, someone's support system, someone's background character. I had forgotten who I was before Daniel. Before the company, before the sacrifices, and for the first time in months, I wasn't crying. I was thinking. Vanessa had youth. Daniel had money. But I had something neither of them understood. Perspective, patience, and a mind they'd both underestimated. Because while Daniel was busy falling in love with a fantasy, and Vanessa was busy enjoying her prize, neither of them realized something critical. Daniel had built his empire on confidence, but he had maintained it on trust. And trust is fragile, especially when the wrong person gets too close to your finances. I didn't know it yet, but the woman he left me for was about to teach him the most expensive lesson of his life, and I was going to have a front row seat.
If you've ever watched someone walk away from you like you were nothing, you know the silence that follows. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's just empty. After Daniel moved out, the house felt unfamiliar. Every room echoed. The indentation on his side of the mattress slowly disappeared. His toothbrush was gone. His suits no longer lined the closet. 15 years reduced to cardboard boxes and paperwork. But here's the strange part. The grief didn't come in waves like I expected. It came in questions. Who was I without him? For so long, my life had revolved around supporting his dreams. When his company succeeded, we succeeded. When he grew, we grew. Except he grew away from me. And now I was left staring at a version of myself I didn't fully recognize. The divorce finalized quickly. No dramatic courtroom scene. No screaming. Just signatures and polite nods. We divided everything evenly. The house sold within a month. I moved into a smaller townhouse near the hospital where I worked. Daniel kept his company. Of course he did. It was his baby. I didn't contest it. That was mistake number 2. Because although I had helped build it in the early days, I never insisted on legal ownership beyond what was automatically shared in marriage. I trusted him. And trust, I was learning, was expensive. Meanwhile, Daniel and Vanessa were everywhere. Instagram, LinkedIn, even business newsletters. She had repositioned herself from social media strategist to director of brand expansion. That title hadn't existed before. Funny how love creates new job positions. Their photos were carefully curated. Rooftop dinners, wine tastings, tropical vacations. Conference appearances where she stood beside him in tailored dresses that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. She looked polished, strategic, calculated, and Daniel looked proud. The comments under their posts stung more than I cared to admit. Power couple. She's exactly what you needed. Behind every successful man is the right woman. I used to be that woman, but the narrative had shifted. Vanessa was the upgrade, and I was the outdated version. At least that's what it looked like from the outside. But social media is theater, and I've worked in a hospital long enough to know that what looks perfect from a distance is often fragile up close. The first crack appeared 6 months after our divorce. It came in the form of a late-night phone call. Daniel's name lit up my screen at 11:43 p.m. I stared at it. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but curiosity won. Hello? I answered cautiously. There was a pause, then a sigh. Emily. His voice sounded different, not confident, not polished, tired. What do you want, Daniel? I just needed to talk. That alone told me something was wrong. The Daniel I knew would rather swallow glass than admit vulnerability. Is Vanessa okay? I asked, another pause. She's fine, translation. She's not the problem. So what is it? He hesitated. Business has been complicated. I leaned back against my couch, saying nothing. He filled the silence. Vanessa's been pushing for aggressive expansion, bigger campaigns, higher budget clients, influencer partnerships. She says we need to modernize faster. And? I asked, and I agreed. Of course he did. Vanessa represented youth, innovation, relevance. He probably felt like he had to prove he could keep up. She convinced me to reinvest most of last year's profits into a new digital arm of the company. He continued. We hired a lot of new staff. How many is a lot? 22. I nearly laughed. Daniel, you used to agonize over hiring one intern. I know, he snapped defensively. But things move faster now. Faster, that word again. He was chasing speed, momentum, image. Is it working? I asked quietly, silence, and there it was, the truth. Some of the campaigns underperformed, he admitted. We overestimated projections, meaning they were bleeding money. How much? I pressed. He exhaled sharply. Enough. For the first time since he left, I felt something unexpected. Not pain, not jealousy, perspective. Because the Daniel the first had known, the one I helped build that company with, was cautious, strategic, patient. Vanessa wasn't patient, she was ambitious. There's a difference. Why are you telling me this? I asked. I don't know, he said honestly. You always understood the numbers. That hit me. You always understood the numbers. I used to sit at our kitchen table reviewing his spreadsheets, pointing out risks, suggesting gradual scaling instead of explosive growth. I wasn't glamorous, I wasn't flashy, but I was steady. Vanessa, from what I could see, was fire, and fire burns fast. Daniel, I said evenly, I'm not your financial advisor anymore. I know, he muttered. And I'm not your emotional backup either. He went quiet. I just thought. He started, then stopped. You thought what? That you'd still care. The audacity. I cared when you chose someone else, I said calmly. Now you get to solve problems with the person who makes you feel alive. I hung up, but I couldn't sleep. Because despite everything, I knew something he didn't. Ambition without restraint is dangerous, especially when combined with ego. Over the next few months, small rumors started circulating. A client contract quietly terminated. An influencer lawsuit over unpaid fees. 2 senior employees leaving abruptly. Nothing dramatic, just whispers. And whispers in business are warning signs. Then came the real shock. Daniel proposed to Vanessa. 1 year after our divorce, the announcement was extravagant. A private yacht, fireworks, a diamond so large it practically blinded the camera. The caption read, "When you know, you know." 15 years reduced to a caption. But here's what most people didn't see. The prenup, or rather, the lack of one. A mutual acquaintance, someone who still talked to both of us, mentioned it casually over coffee. "I can't believe Daniel didn't insist on a prenup," she said. My spoon froze midair. He didn't? No, Vanessa said it wasn't romantic, that it showed distrust. I almost smiled. Daniel used to believe in contracts, in protection, in contingency plans. But love makes intelligent people reckless. They married 3 months later. Lavish ceremony, business elites in attendance. Vanessa glowed, Daniel beamed. And I watched none of it. I had stopped stalking their lives. Not because I wasn't curious, but because I was rebuilding mine. I enrolled in an advanced healthcare administration program. I began consulting part-time for small clinics on financial management. I started investing independently, quietly, methodically. While Daniel expanded outward, I built inward. And here's the twist no one expected. Vanessa wasn't just ambitious. She was strategic. Within months of the wedding, she convinced Daniel to restructure the company, to streamline leadership. Her name appeared on official filings as co-owner, equal stake, equal access, equal authority. He probably thought it was romantic, a gesture of trust, a symbol of partnership, but ownership is power, and power shifts dynamics. Suddenly, decisions weren't his alone. Neither were the accounts. Then, almost exactly 18 months after he left me, the second late-night call came. But this time, Daniel didn't sound tired. He sounded panicked. And panic, in a man who once laughed at the idea of losing anything, is the beginning of a fall.
The second late-night call didn't begin with, "Emily." It began with breathing. Fast, uneven, controlled panic trying to sound composed. I glanced at the clock. 1:17 a.m. I almost didn't answer, but something told me this wasn't nostalgia. This was collapse. "Daniel," I said. She moved money. No greeting. No pretense. Just accusation wrapped in fear. I sat up slowly. "What are you talking about?" "Vanessa. She transferred funds out of the corporate reserve account." "How much?" Silence. "Daniel, 200,000. My heart didn't race. I didn't gasp. Because here's the truth. By the time panic reaches your voice, the damage is already deeper than one transaction. "For what?" I asked evenly. She said it was for an influencer acquisition campaign. International expansion. She didn't run the final numbers by me. And the account requires both signatures, doesn't it? "It did," he snapped. Past tense. "What did you change?" I asked quietly. He exhaled sharply. "When we restructured ownership, we simplified authorization. Either of us can approve transactions. Of course. Because nothing says romance like financial vulnerability. Where is the money now?" I asked. She wired it to a partner agency overseas. "Which agency?" Another pause. "I'm still looking into it." Translation. He didn't know. Daniel used to verify every vendor personally. He used to triple-check contract clauses. He used to ask me to review risk exposure before signing anything. Now he was learning what it felt like to trust blindly. "She wouldn't steal from me," he said suddenly. It sounded like he was trying to convince himself. "Daniel," I replied calmly, "I'm not accusing her. I'm asking if you verified the company. She handled the negotiations." That wasn't my question. Silence. And in that silence, the power dynamic became clear. Vanessa wasn't assisting anymore. She was steering. The next week, rumors exploded. A major client pulled out of a campaign mid-launch. Cash flow tightened. Payroll barely cleared. Daniel had leveraged the company's credit line to finance expansion, at Vanessa's urging. And expansion requires constant revenue to sustain. Revenue they no longer had. He called again 3 days later. I think she's planning something. There it was. Fear. Planning what? She's been meeting with investors without me. Isn't that good for the company? Not when she doesn't disclose the terms. He sounded smaller than I had ever heard him, vulnerable. And for the first time I didn't feel anger. I felt recognition. This is what it feels like to be slowly replaced. To realize decisions are being made around you. To sense your relevance shrinking. I found something, he said. What? She amended the partnership agreement 2 months ago. I froze. You signed an amendment without reading it? She said it was procedural. Just to simplify asset structuring. And you trusted her. It wasn't a question. He didn't answer. Daniel, I said carefully. What did the amendment change? His voice lowered. If one partner initiates a bout under certain financial distress conditions, ownership automatically shifts. To who? To the initiating partner. My stomach tightened. Define financial distress. If the company fails to meet projected growth benchmarks for 2 consecutive quarters. I closed my eyes. And suddenly, every aggressive expansion push made sense. Every inflated projection. Every risky investment. If Vanessa controlled the growth targets, and those targets weren't met, she could legally initiate a buyout at a discounted valuation, meaning she could take control while the company was weakened. Daniel, I said slowly, did she set the growth benchmarks? Yes. And are you going to meet them? No. There it was. The trap. And he had walked into it willingly. Why would she do this? He whispered. The same reason anyone positions themselves strategically. Power. Vanessa hadn't married for love. She had married into leverage. But it gets worse. Because love makes people generous. And generosity makes them careless. 2 weeks later, Vanessa initiated the clause. Officially. Legally. Citing underperformance. Daniel received formal notice through the company's legal team. Not from his wife, from attorneys. He told me he stared at the document for an hour before understanding what it meant. If he didn't inject personal capital to stabilize the company immediately, ownership would shift majority to her. Inject how much? I asked. 600,000. I nearly laughed. He didn't have that in liquid form. Most of his wealth was tied up in assets and projected equity. What about your personal accounts? I asked. She has access. Joint accounts. Joint assets. No prenup. No separation of financial power. You transferred personal savings into shared investments after the wedding, didn't you? I asked. Silence. I thought we were building a future, he muttered. And there it was, the difference between us. When Daniel and I built a future, I protected both of us. Vanessa built a future that protected herself. Within a month, the company defaulted on a loan covenant. That triggered penalty clauses. Investors grew nervous. And Vanessa acted quickly. She offered to stabilize operations. By increasing her equity stake, he signed. Because what choice did he have? By the time he understood the depth of it, he owned less than 30% of the company he created. Vanessa owned 55%. The rest belonged to private investors she had introduced. Daniel had gone from founder to minority voice in his own boardroom. The day it became official, he didn't call me immediately. He waited 3 days. I think pride needed time to break. When he finally showed up at my townhouse, he looked older. Not physically, but internally, his confidence was gone. I misjudged her, he said quietly, standing in my doorway. Yes, I replied. He looked around my home. Simple, organized, calm. You seem stable, he said. I am. What did you do? Focused on myself. He swallowed. She says I'm being emotional. That this is just business. It is business, I said evenly. Then why does it feel like betrayal? Because now you understand. But I didn't say that aloud. Instead, I asked, are you still married? He laughed bitterly. For now. Because once power shifts, respect follows. And love rarely survives power imbalance. He told me she had started traveling alone more often. Meeting investors privately. Attending events without him. He had become optional. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "You used to warn me about rushing expansion," he said softly. "Yes. I thought you were holding me back." "No," I corrected gently. "I was holding you steady. There's a difference. And stability is rarely exciting, until it's gone." 3 months later, Vanessa filed for divorce. On grounds of irreconcilable differences, the settlement terms were brutal. Because without a prenup, without protected assets, without majority control of the company, Daniel had almost nothing that wasn't already entangled. And Vanessa knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't just leaving him. She was extracting him. By the time legal proceedings began, Daniel realized something terrifying. The woman he left me for was far more calculated than he ever imagined. And she wasn't finished yet. There's something almost clinical about the way power shifts in a marriage. It doesn't explode. It reallocates. By the time Vanessa filed for divorce, she wasn't acting out of heartbreak. She was executing a strategy. Daniel, on the other hand, was still operating under emotion. And emotion is expensive in a courtroom. He didn't tell me immediately when she filed. I heard through a mutual acquaintance first. "Did you see the news?" she asked over the phone. "What news?" "Vanessa filed yesterday." I wasn't shocked. I was curious. When Daniel finally called that evening, his voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. "She's asking for half of everything." I almost smiled at the irony. That was exactly what I had asked for. The difference? When I divorced Daniel, he had full control of his company and liquidity. When Vanessa divorced him, she controlled the company and most of the liquidity. "Define everything," I said calmly. "She's claiming marital contributions to brand expansion, strategic growth, and asset development. In other words," I translated, "she's saying she helped increase the company's value." "Yes. And legally, she did." Because while I had supported Daniel quietly, Vanessa had inserted herself officially. Her name was on filings. Her signature on agreements. Her equity documented. She wasn't the supportive wife in the background. She was the co-owner on paper. That changes everything. "She's also contesting property division," he added. "What property?" "The downtown condo." I blinked. "What condo?" He hesitated. "The one we bought last year." "We?" "Vanessa and I." "And it's in whose name?" "Both. Joint assets again. No safeguards. No barriers." I leaned back and exhaled slowly. "Daniel, what exactly do you still own independently?" Silence. The answer was nothing significant. Because when Vanessa came into his life, she didn't just fall in love. She integrated. Into his finances. Into his contracts. Into his ownership structure. By the time she filed for divorce, she wasn't asking for half of his world. She was asking for half of a world she already partially controlled. The first court hearing was tense. Daniel hired a high-powered attorney, expensive, aggressive. Vanessa hired someone even sharper. You could see it in the courtroom dynamic. She was composed, confident, unshaken. Daniel looked defensive, reactive. He later told me something that stuck. She didn't cry once. That's because she wasn't grieving. She was concluding a transaction. During discovery, the full scope of her financial maneuvering came to light. It wasn't illegal, that's what made it terrifying. It was meticulous. She had gradually positioned herself as indispensable in major deals, negotiated contracts under her oversight, built investor relationships that bypassed Daniel entirely. When investors were questioned, several admitted they trusted her judgment more than his in recent quarters. That's when it hit him. She hadn't just taken control of the company. She had taken control of the narrative. In board meetings, she presented herself as the stabilizing force after Daniel's emotional distractions. Emotional distractions. That's how she framed his hesitation about expansion. She subtly painted him as outdated, risk-averse, slow, while she was progressive, visionary, modern. By the time divorce proceedings began, investors were already aligned with her. Daniel was isolated in his own creation. But the most devastating revelation came 3 weeks into the legal battle. The overseas agency, the one she wired $200,000 to early on. It was connected to a holding company. a holding company partially owned by a private trust. And that trust listed Vanessa as a beneficiary, not sole owner, but beneficiary. It was layered, indirect, but clear. She had positioned funds into an entity that would ultimately circle back to her. Legally gray. Morally precise. When Daniel's lawyer uncovered it, he was furious. "This is asset diversion," he argued. Vanessa's legal team countered immediately. It was a legitimate business partnership. Returns were reinvested. And, technically, they were. The funds hadn't disappeared. They had moved, strategically. By the time forensic accountants finished tracing everything, the picture was undeniable. Vanessa hadn't impulsively expanded the company. She had redirected capital, placed ownership stakes in satellite ventures, structured profit-sharing agreements that favored entities under her influence, all while presenting it as growth. Daniel had signed every authorization, trusted every projection, believed every reassurance. Because love, when mixed with ego, makes men blind. And Vanessa understood that. Outside the courtroom, public perception shifted. The same people who once praised them as a power couple now whispered, "Did you hear? She outplayed him." I always thought she was too polished, and I watched it all quietly. Not with joy, not with revenge, but with clarity. Because here's what no one talks about when a man leaves his wife for someone younger. He assumes youth equals admiration. He assumes beauty equals devotion. He assumes excitement equals loyalty. But loyalty is built in struggle. And Daniel had only shown Vanessa success. He had shown me the struggle. That's why I was careful. That's why I protected. That's why I built slowly. Vanessa didn't want to protect his empire. She wanted to leverage it. The divorce settlement negotiations became brutal. She demanded majority equity retention in the company, the downtown condo, a substantial payout citing brand co-creation, spousal support, temporarily. Daniel nearly lost it when he read that last clause. Spousal support? He repeated in disbelief. From me? But here's the reality. On paper, during the years of explosive growth, Vanessa's strategic influence increased company valuation significantly, even if that growth was unstable. And valuation matters in court. Her attorney argued that her branding initiatives elevated corporate worth, thereby increasing Daniel's personal net value during marriage, which meant she was entitled to compensation. It was infuriating. It was brilliant, and it was legally sound. The final blow came during mediation. Vanessa made an offer. She would waive extended litigation if Daniel agreed to transfer his remaining shares in a key subsidiary venture, the same subsidiary tied to future digital licensing revenue. It was the one asset projected to recover long-term. If he surrendered it, he would walk away with immediate relief from certain debts. If he refused, the legal battle could drag on for years. He called me the night before he had to decide. "I don't know what to do," he admitted. And for the first time since our divorce, I didn't feel like the woman he left. I felt like the woman who understood him best. "Daniel," I said carefully, "what are you trying to save? Pride or solvency?" He was quiet for a long time. "She outplayed me," he whispered. "Yes, I thought I was in control. You weren't." Another long pause. "Then, were you always this calm?" "No," I answered honestly. "I just learned." The next day he signed. He transferred the subsidiary. He relinquished majority equity. He kept a minority stake and enough assets to survive, but not thrive. Vanessa walked away with control. Control of the company. Control of the condo. Control of several satellite ventures. And control of the narrative. But what she didn't anticipate was what happens when you extract everything from someone who built something from nothing. Because losing money hurts. Losing pride hurts more. But losing illusion? That transforms you. And Daniel was finally seeing clearly. For the first time in years, the man who laughed when he left me was now sitting alone in a rented apartment, not bankrupt, but hollowed. And when everything you thought you owned is stripped away, you're forced to confront the one thing you can't transfer: your choices. And Daniel was about to understand the full cost of his. There's a particular kind of silence that lives in small apartments. It's not the peaceful kind. It's the kind that echoes. Daniel moved into a furnished one-bedroom on the edge of downtown. Neutral walls, generic art, thin carpet. For the first time in nearly a decade, he didn't wake up to a full schedule of meetings. He told me later that the hardest part wasn't losing the company. It wasn't the condo. It wasn't even the money. It was irrelevance. He had gone from founder and CEO to minority consultant. Vanessa didn't fire him outright. That would have looked bad publicly. Instead, she restructured leadership. He was repositioned as strategic advisor. No final say. No executive authority. A title designed to look respectful while stripping power. The board voted unanimously. Of course they did. She had aligned them months earlier. When he told me that, I asked one question. When did you stop reading the room? He didn't answer. Because the truth was simple. He stopped reading the room when he started believing he was the room. Ego has a way of isolating you from warning signs. The first few weeks after the divorce, he tried to maintain appearances. But something had shifted. People could feel it. Influence isn't about money, it's about leverage. And Daniel no longer had leverage. Investors now called Vanessa directly. Industry invitations had her name first. And that's when it happened. The moment rock bottom stopped being abstract. He tried to initiate a new venture, a consulting firm under his name. He assumed his reputation would carry him. It didn't, because reputation tied to power fades when power disappears. 2 potential clients backed out after reconsidering market alignment. Translation: you lost. And in business, people back winners. He stopped calling me as often after that. Pride doesn't like witnesses. Meanwhile, Vanessa's empire looked unstoppable. From the outside, the company announced record digital engagement metrics, new international partnerships, a feature in a major business magazine, her photo on the cover. I saw it while standing in line at a grocery store. For a moment, I felt that old sting, the feeling of being replaced. But then I noticed something subtle. The article talked about rapid growth. Engagement isn't revenue. Buzz isn't stability. And speed, without foundation, creates fractures. 3 months after the divorce finalized, those fractures began to surface. It started with layoffs, quiet at first. I heard through one of Daniel's former managers, someone who still respected him, that several campaigns had underperformed drastically. The satellite ventures Vanessa had positioned under complex structures? Over-leveraged. Debt layered upon debt. Growth funded by borrowed capital. Daniel didn't call me about it. I called him. A long pause. Yes. And she's doubling down. Of course she was. When aggressive strategies falter, ego rarely retreats. She's seeking additional investor capital, he continued. In simple terms, the company was eating itself to survive. And here's the irony. The same clause she used to take majority control could now be used against her. If the company missed new growth targets under her leadership, investors could force restructuring, meaning she could lose controlling interest. The trap she designed was tightening around her. But unlike Daniel, she wasn't operating emotionally. She was maneuvering. And that's when the final twist began unfolding. Remember the holding company tied to that early overseas transfer? The one listing her as beneficiary? It had grown significantly. While the main company struggled publicly, that entity quietly acquired assets at reduced valuations, including shares, investor shares, distressed shares. Vanessa was consolidating ownership through back channels. It was ruthless. But here's what she underestimated. Markets remember patterns. And investors dislike opacity. When one major investor discovered the interconnected ownership web, confidence shattered. An invasive scrutiny slows everything. Campaign launches paused. For the first time since she entered Daniel's life, Daniel told me about the board meeting where it shifted. She looked rattled, he said quietly. The lead investor asked direct questions about the holding structure. I almost smiled. Market volatility doesn't create layered beneficiary trusts. Within weeks, the company's valuation dropped sharply. And here's where fate becomes almost poetic. Daniel still owned minority shares. Shares he had considered worthless months earlier. If the company stabilized under restructuring. Meanwhile, Vanessa's personal liquidity was tied heavily to the company's perceived dominance. And perception had shifted. The same media outlets that praised her began asking questions. And in business, narrative momentum is everything. She had built her image on invincibility. Now she was defending credibility. Daniel came over one evening. Not defeated this time. Not confident either, just clear. "What? You never tried to impress anyone?" "No," I said simply. "I tried to protect what we had." He nodded slowly. "I mistook caution for limitation. And excitement for loyalty," I added. He didn't argue. For the first time in years, there was no ego in the room. Just consequence and reflection. But here's the truth. Daniel built his life on growth without securing structure. Vanessa built her strategy on leverage without securing trust. And both of those eventually crack. The final shift was coming, not explosive, but decisive. Because when financial structures weaken, ownership rebalances. And the very mechanism Vanessa used to take everything from Daniel. Success is loud. Collapse is quiet. There was no dramatic headline announcing the fall. No viral scandal. No criminal charges. Just numbers. And numbers, when they turn against you, don't scream. They suffocate. 6 months after Vanessa's magazine cover, the company announced a strategic restructuring. That's corporate language for survival mode. Investor confidence had thinned. The holding company web she built to consolidate power became a liability once fully understood. It wasn't illegal, but it wasn't clean. And investors don't like complexity when money is at risk. Credit tightened. Bridge financing matured. Revenue projections were revised downward, publicly. That's when valuation truly dropped. Not because the company had no future, but because belief in its leadership weakened. And leadership, once doubted, rarely regains its former shine. Daniel and I were sitting on my patio the evening the official board vote happened. It was cool outside. The kind of quiet evening that feels reflective. His phone buzzed. He looked at it, then looked at me. "It's done," he said. "What is?" "She's been removed as CEO." I didn't react immediately. Removed? Investor vote. Emergency governance shift. And her equity? Still substantial. But no longer controlling. There it was. The balance correcting itself. The mechanism she used to take power had turned on her. The board appointed an interim executive. Someone external, neutral, experienced in corporate recovery. Vanessa retained shares, but lost operational authority, which meant something critical. She could no longer steer narrative, and narrative was always her greatest weapon. The press coverage was restrained but pointed. Rapid growth strategy under scrutiny. Governance concerns prompt leadership change. Careful language, but unmistakable. For someone who built her identity on dominance, it was a reputational fracture. Daniel's minority shares rose slightly after restructuring was announced. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough to matter. Enough to breathe. For the first time since the divorce, he wasn't reacting. He wasn't chasing. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He was observing. "You know what's strange?" he said that night. "What?" "I don't hate her." That surprised me. "You don't?" "No. She played the game better than I did." That was growth, not absolution, but clarity. "And you?" he asked quietly. "Do you hate me?" There it was. The question that had been waiting years. I thought about it honestly. There was a time I did. A time when I replayed every moment in my head. Every comparison. Every laugh under her photos. Every comment calling her an upgrade. But hatred is heavy. And I had rebuilt my life too intentionally to carry that weight. "No," I said gently. "I don't." He exhaled slowly. "I thought you'd be happy," he admitted. "About what?" "That she took everything." I shook my head. "She didn't take everything." He frowned. "She took the company." "Yes." "She took the condo." "Yes." "She took most of my liquidity." "Yes." "But she didn't take your ability to build again." He went quiet. Because here's what people misunderstand about loss. Money can be extracted. Ownership can be transferred. Titles can be reassigned. But competence, experience, lesson earned wisdom, those stay. Vanessa had leveraged speed. Daniel had rediscovered patience, and patience rebuilds differently. Over the next year, something unexpected happened. Not a dramatic comeback. Not a viral redemption arc. Just steady rebuilding. Daniel's consulting work gained traction. Slowly this time. Smaller firms. Private strategy sessions. Financial advisory partnerships. He focused on sustainability instead of expansion. Margins instead of headlines. And because he had lived through aggressive scaling failure, he became valuable in a new way. Caution is boring until it saves you. Meanwhile, Vanessa attempted to launch an independent venture using her brand recognition. It received attention initially, but attention without investor trust doesn't scale far. Her previous network remained polite, but cautious. Power, once perceived as unstable, carries a shadow. She didn't disappear. She didn't collapse, but she no longer dominated. And here's the truth that surprised me most. Watching it all unfold, I didn't feel victorious, I felt confirmed. Because this story was never about her taking everything. It was about Daniel misunderstanding what everything actually meant. He thought everything was youth excite, mint rapid, growth public admiration aggressive, scaling. But everything was actually stability, loyalty, financial, discipline, shared struggle, slow trust he traded, foundation. For fire. And fire, when not contained, consumes. One evening, almost 3 years after he left me, Daniel asked something I didn't expect. Do you ever think about us? It wasn't romantic. It wasn't manipulative. It was reflective. Yes, I answered honestly. And we were good once. He nodded. I ruined that. Yes, no sugarcoating, just truth. He looked at me for a long moment. I used to think you were holding me back. I know. You were actually protecting me. Yes. There's something powerful about being understood too late. It doesn't repair what broke, but it validates what was real. We didn't reconcile. That's important. This isn't a fairy tale about ex-lovers reuniting. It's a story about consequence. About awareness, about what remains after illusion dissolves. Daniel rebuilt modestly, carefully. He'll likely never regain the explosive valuation he once had. But he sleeps, he thinks, he verifies. He reads every contract twice. And when he dates now, he chooses differently. Not younger, not flashier, not louder, but grounded. As for me, I finished my healthcare administration program, expanded my consulting work, invested methodically, bought property independently, built a life that doesn't hinge on someone else's ambition. I stopped defining myself as someone who was left, and started defining myself as someone who endured. People sometimes ask if I believe in karma. I don't think it works the way movies show it. There's no cosmic scoreboard. No dramatic lightning bolt. Just patterns, choices, consequences. Vanessa didn't take everything he owned. She took what he placed in her reach. He handed her leverage. She used it. The real lesson? Guard your foundations. Not out of paranoia, but out of respect for what you've built. Love deeply, but structure wisely. Trust fully, but verify consistently. And never confuse excitement with alignment. The day Daniel left me, I thought I had lost everything. But loss clarifies. It strips you down to identity. And when the noise fades, you realize something powerful. The person who stays steady when everything burns is the one who truly owns something valuable. And that was me. And that's how this story unfolded. A journey of love, loss, and hard-earned lessons. Daniel thought he had everything under control. Vanessa thought she was untouchable, but life has a way of teaching lessons that no one can ignore. What's remarkable is that even when it seems like everything is gone, the one thing no one can take from you is yourself, your wisdom, your resilience, and the choices you make moving forward. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done if this happened to you? Would you fight, walk away, or rebuild quietly? Share your story in the comments. I read every single one. And your experiences could inspire someone else watching right now. If this story gave you chills, or made you think twice about the choices we make in life and love, hit that like button to let me know. And don't forget to subscribe and click the bell so you never miss another story that could change the way you see life, love, and everything in between. And if you want more jaw-dropping stories like this one, stay tuned for the next video where someone's betrayal turns into an unbelievable comeback. You want to believe how it ends. Click on the video that just appeared on your screen to continue the journey. Remember, it's not just about what people take from you. It's about what you choose to build after. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.